Hello and welcome to Shy Talk, an Irish history podcast. My name's Kevin Larney, doing his best impression of the Jason Brennan hello and welcome to Shy Talk. Jason's not here today, so I'm going to rattle through the usual 4 things before we start this episode because it's long enough already. Thanks to everyone who sent us money on Buy Me a Coffee. Special shout out to Joan, who said, I appreciate both Jason and Kevin equally. No favourites here. Thanks for lying, Joan. That was really sweet of you. It really brightened up Jason's week. Thanks also to everyone who's been leaving us ratings and reviews. We've seen an uptake over the last 2 weeks, which is class. I don't understand how it works, but it helps the almighty algorithm somehow, so cheers. And another thanks to everyone who's been buying t-shirts over at shytalkhistory.bigcartel.com. We'll be sending out another batch of those this weekend. If you too want a t-shirt, but you're not sure how to spell shytalkhistory.bigcartel.com, you can head over to our Instagram at shytalkhistory and follow the link in our bio. And if you want us to send you a personal link, you can get in touch with us at shytalkhistory@gmail.com and we'll just email it to you. And that is all that I wanted to say, so here is this week's episode, all about the man who burnt down Washington.
Gather around now, you're in for a story. Old tales of lore, all in search of a glory. The history and mystery of lads, lasses and all. Discoveries and voyages, the rise and the fall. Follow me now as we go back in time. We trace the steps of Irish heritage to find. Joseph from Carlisle and Kevin from Dawn. Guide you through the ways of Shy Talk.
Robert Ross was born in Ross Trevor, County Down, in the year 1766. There's no date of birth or
He
month.
sounds like a Marvel character.
Trevor, yeah.
Robert Ross, who hails from Ross, bollocks Ross. Why?
It was badly written, I'll grant you that. I read in a lot of different sources. Robert Ross came from Ross Trevor, named after his family. It turns out that's not true at all. It comes from, like, Ross is the Irish for forest, the forest of Trevor. It was just a coincidence. Young C.S. Lewis spent a lot of time there as a kid. He wrote in his journal that Kilbrony Park in Ross Trevor was his idea of what Narnia looked like. Now, I'm sure he said that about all the young girls, but he said it about Ross Trevor as well. So Ross was born into a mid-tier, mid-level gentry family. His father's side of the family were Presbyterian Scots. His grandfather had been Lord Mayor of Dublin at some point, and his father had served as a major in the 7 Years' War between Britain and France, which was one of the many wars between Britain and France. His mother, on the other hand, came from Inishannon in Cork, and she was the half-sister of the politician James Caulfield, who was one of the leaders of the 1790s Irish Volunteers and one of the founding knights of the illustrious Order of the Knights of St. Patrick.
Oh!
Yeah, I put that in just for you.
Yeah, it's not as fun when you say it.
No,
it's still nice to hear it, but I prefer saying it myself.
sure. So his uncle Robert Ross was also a colonel. Yeah, Robert Ross. What was the guy? What's
Bob Ross.
Yeah. Well, also I realized halfway through this that our hero's name in this is Bob Ross. But what was the Hulk's enemy?
Oh,
Wasn't Bruce Banner's love interest was Betty Ross?
Let me check.
He was
Yeah, but it's a Marvel trope that they do it for everyone. It's like Bruce Banner.
Yes.
What are the other Marvel? I kiss girls.
Peter Parker.
I don't know. I kiss girls.
What are you, like a fucking 80s bully?
Yeah, that's exactly.
I don't know.
Why don't you make
Marvel names? I'm busy finger banging your ma.
Why don't you make like a tree and go fuck yourself?
Boom.
The Hulk rival.
I think his name is General Ross. I don't know.
Do you mean Thunderbolt Ross?
Yeah, okay.
Which I just
Thunderbolt
yeah,
Ross.
I was going to say just General Thaddeus E. Thunderbolt Ross,
Yeah.
or Red Hulk.
Sure. I mean, that's a more classic Marvel villain where it's just you, but a different color.
Yeah.
So his uncle, also called Robert Ross, was a colonel in the British Army and a prominent politician in nearby Newry town.
An even more prominent painter.
Yes. Maybe they're related, I don't know. So his father used his mother's dowry money to buy the Ross ancestral home from his brother, and this is where Robert Ross was born in 1766. Or perhaps he was born in Dublin. No one really seemed to be paying too much attention. At some point before he was born, his family had converted from Presbyterian to the Church of Ireland. So this is how young Bob Ross was raised. But his family were fairly liberal in their religious views. Later on in life, they would grant land for various churches to be built. Catholic ones, wrong ones, the whole gambit.
You see, you've given me now, to begin the whole story, you've started out, they seem pretty well to do. And also, they seem like good sorts. Like, they're involved in the arts, they're trying to help people. I can only imagine that this story takes a terrible, terrible dark turn.
But don't be so cynical. This could just be a clean story.
It's definitely not, because you told me in advance of this season that you were trying to go for more salacious stories.
I said every one of them is going to get us in hot. We're going to get cancelled by the end of the season, or so help me God. Young Rob Ross was a sickly child growing up. He was raised partially in the south of France. I think that was just a thing the rich people did back then, where, like, for your disposition, you would be sent to the south of France.
It's like you're finishing school. Like, you learn all about the cows in Ireland, and then you go to France to learn about grapes.
I think it was more they sent people there if they had problems with their lungs because the air was better. I don't know. I think it was just like you're less likely to get damp and die if you're living in the south of France than like Newry. But
young Johnny's lungs are bad. Quick, send him to France where 2-year-olds smoke cigars.
There you go. Just get some of that good nicotine in, loosen the whole larynx up. But so he picked up a bit of the French language when he was there as a kid. In 1784, Ross went to Trinity College at the age of 17, along with his older brother. While Ross was there, he apparently had disciplinary issues. At one stage, he got into an argument with the provost of the college, and then subsequently, to get his revenge on the guy, Ross drew a caricature of him and stuck it up on the gate going into the college.
So it is Bob Ross.
It is Bob Ross, yeah. Yeah, he drew a happy little man. I don't know any of the Bob Ross stereotypes.
Oh, it's the same as, what's the Irish fella?
Yeah, the guy in TG Carr.
Like Irish, I think Bob Ross is the same as Irish Paint Magic.
Irish Paint Magic,
yeah,
yes. Who's the guy from that?
David Willis.
Yes.
Yeah, the Irish.
That was such a rip-off of a show, but I loved it.
Yeah, it's the Irish Bob Ross. He's great, and it's just he's just like painting trees and castles in the distance. It's just like water and plants for the most part.
Yeah.
Never anyone's face, because that would take more. Like,
no,
it's just
faces are hard.
Also, Bob Ross is good. I like David Willis because he makes all those noises where he's like, "Oh, we just put a little bit." Like he'll do that as he's as he's like, just give it a little whisk, a little flick, and you get to.
I remember watching
so
it
good.
in college as well. Yeah, it was so good. It was like, and now we paint a little road. We have a road going down the hill, and down at the bottom of the road, there's Mary's house. God bless her, she's not feeling well. She's had a bad dose of the cancer, and oh God, she's had it hard ever since Philip died. He was cheating on her for a couple of years, but God Lord, she loved him anyway. And now
but she never found out. She never found out.
She's probably for the best. Sorry to any of the family listening. You might be adopted. And a happy little sheep. So yeah, it was basically that. I couldn't find the description.
The sheep was who he was cheating on her with.
It was a bit insensitive to put them in the picture together, but that's what the customer asked for. So I couldn't figure out what exactly he drew on this caricature. There was some veiled 17th century references to it being, I'm pretty sure it was just a penis, but whatever it was, he almost got expelled over it. While he was in Trinity, he was part of the College Historical Society, becoming its treasurer at one point. One of his peers in the Hist Society, as it was called, was young Wolfe Tone. He was there, he was probably about 2 years ahead of him, but they would have been in the History Society together. I can't remember what episode we covered it in, where Wolfe Tone was in Trinity and then got expelled for a while for being the second in a duel.
Yes.
And then he went over. Oh, that was it. It was that he went over to Galway and tried to fuck that guy's wife. A national treasure.
Wolfe Tone, more like a wolfhound.
Yeah. So Ross graduated with his BA from Trinity in 1789 and joined the British Army that same year, just like his old man. He was 23, which I thought was a normal age for joining the military, but apparently for the
No.
times that was pretty old.
Yeah, no, even today that's old. The only time you'll find people like 23 that join the army now is just the unemployed, or if there's been a terrorist attack on US soil.
Yeah, I couldn't get over, especially I noticed it during college, I guess, but whenever you're watching British TV, daytime TV is full of ads of just like, are you bored? Join the military. Why not?
See some of the world from inside of a tank.
It's always like a guy and he's photocopying documents in an office and it's set in like this dull grayscale. And it's like, why photocopy documents when you can be shredding documents in a black offsite near Iraq? He's tired of scanning fruit cans at the local Tesco's? Go shoot a man. That'll be easier to deal with.
I mean, that's the military, Kev. I don't think I've ever met a single person in the military who left the organization, be it in any country, and then had a good word to say. Actually, do you know what? I was going to say I wouldn't have a good word to say about it. I did meet a bunch of Israelis in Myanmar.
Oh, yeah.
They were still pretty on it. They were like, nah.
Were they pretty pro?
Yeah, they were like, can't wait to get back in. We're just on a sabbatical.
Yeah. Did they have mandatory military service?
Yeah, and then what they do is directly afterwards, a lot of them just go traveling.
So apparently because he was, it was late in the day to be joining the military, but apparently because he was like the second son of a gentry family, it was pretty much expected, especially because his dad and his uncle were military guys. I don't know. Is it the old like doctor priest phenomenon?
I was going to say, I think it is. I think
the
rich don't send people to be priests, but they'll send the upper class or the smart ones to the army, and then the stupid ones. Well, I guess no, because usually they'd be sent to be priests.
Well, actually, I think his younger brother did become a reverend.
Ah, okay.
I guess the eldest brother is sort of supposed to take over the running of the land.
Yeah.
And then the second brother becomes an officer in the army. So Ross started out in Gibraltar, where he made friends with one of the British royals, Prince Edward. Edward wanted to clean up the British colony in Gibraltar, so he ordered all the bars and pubs to be closed, which did not go down well with any of the men in the army. He didn't last long after that. I think they were there for like a couple of weeks before he was moved to Canada, and all the pubs subsequently reopened to Gibraltar. But
that's a nice way of killing somebody. Just telling people, I think they went to Canada.
Yeah.
All of the pubs are closed. Leo and the boys would want to be careful of that now, that they don't, if this whole COVID thing keeps going longer, you want to be careful they don't get sent to Canada.
Yeah. Well, Ross had taken, I don't know how, Ross was friends with him anyway, so he went to Canada with him. He was stationed there with him for a couple of months, during which time Edward came under, I think there was at least one mutiny and 2 assassination attempts.
What was he trying?
He wasn't a popular man.
What was he trying to ban in Canada? Cocaine and sex.
He showed up and he was like, no more hunting beavers, no more poutine.
Is hunting beavers a euphemism for the thing I just said?
It was at the time, yes. So I think Ross, well, 2 things, I guess. His friendship with Edward helped him out later on with like promotions and stuff and getting ahead in the army. But I think it also taught him how to, like, what not to do in terms of being a good leader.
Okay, fair.
That Prince Edward would go on to give birth to, well, it helped to give birth to Queen Victoria.
Are you one of those?
What?
Oh yeah, I had a kid. Oh, you didn't have a kid. Your wife had a kid. Really? Because I was the one who drove her to the hospital when she was like 10 stone overweight. So if you wanted, who was making her food for the last month?
I barely even mentioned it. I barely even made a fuss.
Yeah, but I do think it's always pretty funny when like the amount of women I've seen say that to guys who have kids and the woman doesn't have a child. Where it's like a man has like raised 2 children and he'll be like, because when we were pregnant, and then it's a single girl in their 20s who's like, your wife had the child?
Well, I think it was just because specifically there I said he gave birth to Queen Victoria, which, despite what I've read in a couple of lizard blogs, is not exactly what happened. So that's where Ross is at the minute. Back in 1789, the same year that Ross joined the army, the French Revolution kicked off, which led to the execution of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette and culminated in the appointment of Napoleon Bonaparte as first Council of France in November of 1799.
Is there a reason why you try to put the accent on for certain names? and then not the other ones.
Yeah, I don't know.
Marie
Marie Antoinette and Napoleon Bonaparte.
Yeah, Napoleon Bonaparte. Like that's
And Louis the 16th.
Louis the 16th.
So during the revolutionary period, the French figured since they were already up and they already had their shoes on, they were fighting anyway, so they may as well go and settle some old scores. So in 1792, they declared war on Austria and invaded the Austrian Netherlands to the north. And by the following year, they were also at war with the kingdoms of Britain, Spain, Prussia, Holland, various Germans, Swedens, the whole lot. Because all the other monarchs of Europe wanted to restore the French monarchy, because obviously the idea of the people rising up and killing the kings and queens and then ruling themselves democratically is bad for business.
Yeah, it doesn't seem great. Also, I like the fact that they'd started with one war and then it's everyone. So it's like going to a party and having a problem with one person.
Yeah.
You're like, well, it's either him or it's me. And everyone collectively is like, well, you're being a bastard.
Yeah. And it's mad. Like, it seems they had a lot on their plate. The French Revolution is a huge turning point in the shifting away from monarchies to democracies. They had a lot going on already, and they're like, well, while we're at it, we may as well fight everybody in Europe as well. So they need to keep their army numbers up. And in order to do this, they issued a levy en masse in 1793, which was the conscription of all unmarried, able-bodied men between the ages of 18 and 25. So the revolution had removed the monarchy and gotten rid of the idea of the people of France just being subjects of a ruler. They were now citizens of France, which meant that they had to go fight themselves. Which seems like...
Yeah. What's the term? It's not better the devil you know. It's
well, it's like meet the new boss, just like the old boss. They're now citizens of this country, which means that instead of just being like protected by a feudal lord or whatever, they have to go pick up a gun and fight themselves.
Yeah, but I'm not going to fight in the behalf of a man that I don't believe in. I will fight the exact same war once he's not there.
Yes.
I want to overthrow him so that we can fight the exact same enemy.
Yes, you're no longer fighting and dying for some king you've never met. You're fighting for the concept of France, which is marginally easier to get behind, I guess. But
it's like it sounds like the opposite of a civil war. They were like, no, let's fight each other and deplete our resources, kill each other, and then just go fight the exact same enemies.
Yeah. We're going to do the same thing that we used to do, but this time it's for us. Yeah, by which I mean, there's no difference for you.
Why would we fight them when we could just practice on each other first?
So these are what you're listening is the downsides. The levy managed to raise an army between, there's different accounts of it, but somewhere between 750,000 men, 750,000 and 800,000 men, which was by far the largest army that had ever been created in Europe. So this idea of like conscription of everybody and not just, feudal lords or whatever wasn't a new concept, but it hadn't really been put into practice before this. Previously, battles were fought between much smaller armies, but this set a precedent of turning your whole country into an army, which would prove pretty beneficial 100 years later during World War I and World War II. Get everybody in there. So now France had a giant army and they're fighting everyone in Europe, and that kind of dominated the European war scene during the 1790s. Back home in Ireland, the Irish Rebellion of 1798 was taken off, and Robert Ross's old classmate Wolfe had visited his hometown of Rostrevor twice over the year to try and stir up support for his United Irishmen. The town was fairly divided on their views of a United Ireland.
Do you think there was a fella there? Do you think there was a fella there called Trevor Ross who just didn't quite?
Yeah, that is a Marvel character who was like his total opposite, Trevor Ross. So they're kind of divided. The people of Rostrevor were divided. They didn't know whether to support Wolfe and his new rebellion.
Whether to support Rostrevor or Trevor Ross. The town was divided.
Right down the middle. At some point in 1798, a local hedge schoolmaster called Thomas Dunn was brutally flogged and killed by a British army regiment from County Down. So that kind of tipped the scale towards Trevor Ross. Public opinion in the town turned against Robert Ross because he was like, the big military guy from the local rich family. And he was a big deal major at this stage. Although he wasn't stationed in Ireland at any point during the rebellion. But he was still like
the
major
rank,
that those guys
that the
knew.
Rank above major?
Big
deal major. You know, you've got your lieutenants, you've got your majors, you've got your big deal majors.
So yeah, the town turned against Ross a bit. His battalion's attention was focused on the French Revolutionary Wars, and in 1799, Bob Ross was fighting in Holland with the British and Russian armies against the French under Sir Ralph Abercrombie of the clothing line fame.
Oh, now, because that's obviously the reference. Is that true?
No idea.
Could
I mean, it'd be hard to disprove.
It's such I've never met an Abercrombie.
No.
Yeah.
And certainly, like later on in this story, he pairs up with a General Fitch, and that's when things really start to take off. So, I think they lost that fight in Holland, I don't know, but he continued on with Abercrombie to Egypt and fought in the Battle of Alexandria alongside the Ottomans against the French in 1801. The British won the battle, but poor Ralph got shot in the leg with a musket ball.
Different time period. Now you've got to call them the Otto people.
Of course, yes, yeah. I don't know why I enjoy this sort of stuff so much, but Abercrombie got shot in the leg with a musket ball, and there's accounts of him being like taken off the battlefield, everyone's cheering, they've just won the day, and then he just dies a week later because they can't get the ball out of his leg. He's like a big military hero, and they've got their best men on the job, and they just take him back to the ship. There's no battle happening anymore, and 7 days later he just dies.
Like Khal Drogo in Game of Thrones.
Exactly like Carl.
And as soon as I saw that, I was like,
Khal Drogo.
Carl. That's it. But as soon as you see that, it's not a spoiler anymore. That's the first season, Fecky. As soon as you see the guy get like that tiny little cut, you're like, well, of course he's going to die. Because it's to show that strength and the brawn doesn't really make up for the fact of like the lack of medical advancements at the time.
One thing I have learned from doing this podcast is how much George R.R. Martin just lifted shit straight out of history. Like that sort of stuff happened quite a lot, it seems. People just died of small wounds because we didn't know how to do anything. Now, while he was fighting in Egypt, Robert Ross met a future friend of his and fellow officer George Cockburn for the first time. Now, I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be pronounced Coburn. It's like Cockburn.
No, why would it be?
It reads Cockburn.
Why would it be pronounced Coburn?
I'll tell you why, Jason, because if your name was Cockburn at some point over the space of 500 years, someone would have been like, actually, it's Coburn. So I think it's pronounced Coburn, but it's definitely Cockburn.
It's actually pronounced Bouquet.
Exactly that. So these two meet and become friends. Ross distinguished himself as a military leader during the campaign and helped defeat the French presence in Egypt so that the British could still be in Egypt. I'm not entirely sure how that ended.
Oh, I could probably tell you how it ended. I'm going to assume with the British military's history in Africa, probably with concentration camps that no one references today.
I would imagine that after the military intervention, the British Museum suddenly opened the new Egyptian wing.
Look at all of these rubies that the Egyptians donated.
Yeah, look at these interesting artifacts we have. So once Napoleon got into power properly in France, I think he became the emperor officially in like 1804. The French Revolutionary Wars come to an end. So that's like a period of about 10 to 12 years where everyone's fighting each other. That all stops. And then the Napoleonic Wars begin pretty much right away. But in between the two sets of wars, Ross returns home and marries Elizabeth Glasscock of Dublin. Now, Jason, I think it's technically pronounced Glasscook.
I think it's technically pronounced dildo.
So the two of them got married in 1802. He was 36, which when I was writing this again, I was like, geez, that's pretty old to be getting married. But, I mean...
It's funny that you think that's too old to be getting married, whereas I already have it in my head of going, like, that's about the time I'm going to need to start getting my act together.
That's what I mean. Like, I was like, geez, that's late in the day. It's like, you would be lucky to be married in 6 years.
If I could be emotionally available and open by 34, I'll feel like pretty good about it.
You'd be killing it, yeah. But, so around about, I think they get married in December. In May of the following year, Ross is sent back to Italy to fight the French again. This time he's accompanied by his new wife. She travels along with him. Ross established himself as a likable leader who could joke around with his troops, but he also demanded peak physical fitness from them. And importantly, he fought alongside them on the front line, which I think endeared his troops to him. It was an interesting thing, I kind of thought. It said that his regiment was one of the fittest regiments in the army because he sent them on like 8-9 hour cross-country running sprints, I guess. I don't know how common... I always thought it'd be interesting, like, if any idiot from nowadays ended up going back in time to the 1700s, would you be a good military leader just by virtue of, like, being able to say, eat some fruit? This is called jogging.
Right. Again, I would be... If I was going back in time, the last thing I would be doing would be like, oh, I'll be a military leader. I'm going to get... Like, no, I'm just going to go pay women compliments. And just have sex. Just like,
not a hope.
Just like, hey,
you'd be Jack the Ripper within a week's time.
I'm going to be like, hey, do you want me to carry that bucket of water for you? Done. I'm golden. I'm getting syphilis within a week.
You'd walk up to a woman and try and talk to her, and then you'd get cut down by 7 men. And you wouldn't be able to see them coming because you're short-sighted and there's no glasses in the past.
That's very true. I would have to bring back I actually broke my glasses the other day.
Can't do that in 1706.
I know. I woke up in the middle of the night and I was a little bit drunk. And I was like, right, I need to go to the bathroom, but I don't have my glasses. I can see anyway, it's not a problem. But also I'm cognizant enough to know that they might have fallen off the bed. They're probably on the floor. If I step out now, I'm just going to smash them. So I like tenderly touched all around the floor with my feet. Not a sign of it. Walked all the way over to the door in the pitch dark. Somehow my glasses right beside the door. Stepped on them, smashed them. I'm contacts. I'm just pure right now. I'm like, I don't know how they got there. It's like I literally left them there as a prank to piss a sober me off.
You were probably thinking, I don't want to leave them beside the bed in case I step on them in the morning. I'll leave them by the door, out of harm's way. Yeah,
smashed to pieces now. I'm wearing these like small hipster glasses. I look like a young Harry Potter.
At the best of times, yeah. So, well, listen, I don't know if this was like it seems like it was forward thinking for a general making his troops run because he was accommodated for it. Everyone thought he was a great general. But he was also a likable man. At some point, his regiment was hosting another regiment. They all came together for dinner in the big mess hall.
They shouldn't call it that. If they want to keep that place clean,
sure,
they'd want to change the name post days.
Two of his soldiers told a visiting soldier called Diggle that they had an unusual... That's the name I thought you were going to say he had to change.
Diggle.
Yeah, they told young Diggle that they had a weird custom around their place where at the end of every meal they'd raise a toast saying, "Damn the general officers."
Which, to be fair, was a giant waste of bread.
It was, and listen, bread wasn't easy to come by back then, especially not the burnt kind. But falling for the obvious prank, Diggle made a tit of himself at the end of the dinner when he stood up and said, "Damn the general officers." His regiment had a meeting then the next morning to figure out what to do with him, probably shoot him in the back of the head. But Ross intervened and was like, "Listen, man, it's a joke. Relax." Which, it does seem like a small thing, but I guess if you think about the stereotype of like a stiff-lipped British military officer in 1800s, if some guy stood up and said, "Damn the general officers," he probably would have been lynched there and then.
Well, you know,
so at least Ross
it was taken. That's thing. It was taken as a joke because they allowed the next day they shot him in the back of the head instead of right then and there. That's the.
I don't know when it might have been just there and then. I don't know.
No. That was quite good. That was in good jest. Give him 6 hours.
Give me back those military boots and start running. We'll give you a 2-minute head start. Well, that was an example of how Ross was a human, I guess. While they were living in Malta, Ross's wife gave birth to 2 kids. One of them survived, which was the style at the time. He led a regiment against the French in the Battle of Maida in the Kingdom of Napoli in 1806, which was apparently some hot shit battle.
The audience...
he was issued his first medal for the conduct.
The audience can't see, but when he did the French word, it was just... normal. Actually, I think maybe you were doing a little twist of a mustache. And then when you went to the Italian, you literally did the, spaghetti, pizza, bolognese, mamma mia.
It's the only way I can say Napoli.
Yeah.
But it was some big battle. Ross got his first medal there, and this got him into the press. Suddenly, he was like a national hero. So largely on the back of his success in Medina, Ross was promoted to lieutenant colonel in 1808, and he fought with the Portuguese against the Spanish and the French at the Battle of Corunna in Spain in 1809. This is where he gets commended for the fitness of his troops. You know, he's been putting them through this cross-training exercise the whole time. They're ready, they can run over mountains, run through forests, and that becomes really useful when they're running away from the French for most of this battle. There's different accounts from different military officers being like, he did a really good job. His regiment was the one that ran away the fastest.
Yes.
They really just got out of there.
Thank God for their fitness capabilities, because they looked at the other army and said, we're not going to go around this army. We're not going to run over this army. We're not going to run under this army. We're going to run straight the opposite direction away from everyone in battle.
Just get out.
Yeah, God is it. Ain't no army tall enough to make me want to fight
them. So this is 1809. Around about this time, Ross's mother dies. I think his father had already died before this. So he spends a lot of time traveling back to Rostrevor, trying to deal with issues with the will. I think there's him and two siblings, and they're all arguing over who gets what, which creates big division in the family, which it's nice to see that was still a thing back then. So him and his whole regiment are based in Mallow in County Cork for a while, and while they're waiting there, Ross has two more children.
Are they out in the woods, out in the bogland, out in the marsh?
Yes, the marshmallows. By 1810, the following year, Ross was now a full colonel, as well as an aide-de-camp to the king. But he wanted more, Jason. He wanted it all. He wanted to lead his own brigade. But he was told he was too far down the list of applicants, as it was done by seniority, and he'd spent like a year travelling forwards and backwards to his hometown just to sort out who owned the land that his parents died in. But he was also told a hot tip that if he went to the front lines of the fighting, the fact that so many officers were dying all the time meant that there was a good chance for promotion. So
that is not a bad idea.
But like at this stage,
it's all risk. It's all risk and all reward.
Yeah.
But
he's in his mid-40s. He's at home. He's got 3 or 4 kids at this stage.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not just him, it's his whole regiment. And he's like, I can wait my turn and get promoted into the job, or I can risk it all.
Yeah, but it's weird because I'm looking at you now, and by your facial contortions, you're like, this seems like unreasonable. Whereas I'm thinking the exact opposite. You get to your mid-40s in this era, dude, you're 80 basically. I'm not waiting my turn. The next day, like, you step on a rusty nail and you die. Like, that's not, like, you're at that level. You have 4 kids. They're carrying on the name. At least one of them is going to live till they're 10. Like, that's going to be okay. Don't worry. You've got that sorted. You've got a wife you don't need to care about because it's the time period. You're looking for glory.
Glasscock can take out for themselves.
Yeah. You're good. You're good now. Well, you just bring in a bunch of, like, 1,000 innocent men into the hard battle front lines of war. Yeah, you get a name. You get one more rank on top of that. A hero, Kev. All of a sudden, you're getting talked about 200 years later, and you find 2 comedians who don't know anything about history mentioning your name on a podcast. Listen to, I get that's a big deal. I can see why.
This is what it's for.
This is what it's about.
So, you're dead right. He brings all of his men. He says, listen, fuck Mallow. Let's get back into it. And in 1812, his regiment heads back into the fray, into the Iberian theatre of the war. The British were
Where
back
did they go wrong? They lost a friend somewhere along this bitter
end. So at this stage, the war had taken a twist, and now the British were fighting alongside the Portuguese and the Spanish against the French. Napoleon had betrayed the French. I think he gotten rid of their king and put his own brother in charge. And the Spanish, they didn't like that, so they teamed up with the British and Portuguese against the French this time. So around about this stage, a decree came from London that changed the way people were made officers, people got promotions, which now worried less about seniority and more about skill, which is a pretty revolutionary idea at the time. But I guess Britain is now fighting against half of Europe, so they're like, maybe fuck the waiting list. Maybe just because some old guy's been on there for 20 years, we should promote people who can do the job instead. So this works out well for Ross, and he finally...
Wait, hold on. Are you still talking about 19th century British military or 2020 Irish civil servant jobs?
It's one and the same. They took a small break from the Irish civil service model, and they're like, well, let's just promote the people who can do the jobs, and then when the war is over, we'll just go back to nepotism and seniority.
Yeah.
So the new system worked out well for Ross, and he got his wish of leading his own brigade as a major general at the age of 47. He led his troops in several battles in the Peninsulan Wars, as they were called, and he was commended for beating the French in one big battle, after which the British forces captured about 5 million francs worth of stuff, 151 cannons, and what was described as a mobile brothel that the French had brought into the battlefield with them.
Is a mobile brothel just a woman?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe they'd never seen a woman on the battlefield. Like, it's
brothel,
some sort of mobile brothel, sir.
This brothel over here, it's walking around on two legs, and it has its own sense of thought and beliefs. I'm not really fully sure of what's happening.
Well, burn it down, men. Also, I guess it wasn't that mobile if they didn't manage to take it with them in their retreat. But Ross's hot streak came to an end when he was severely wounded in the Battle of Orthez in February of 1814.
To be fair, a hot streak is exactly what I have every time I've left a brothel. It's going to burn for a little while. Such is the risks you take.
Listen, a man has just been shot, all right? A little bit of decorum.
A man has not just been shot. A man was shot 200 years ago. I'm over it.
Yeah, it's fair enough. But, well, you'll be glad to know, Jason, he survives. And after a week or so, he wrote to his brother-in-law to say, "You'll be happy to hear that the hit I got in the chops is likely to prove of mere temporary inconvenience." But it did mean that he had to sit out the rest of the war, which ended 2 months later in April, when Napoleon was defeated and exiled to the island of Elba off the coast of Italy.
Oh, what a lucky.
Yes.
He got to go to exile.
He got to go into exile. This is like classic exile. He was also exiled like down the road from where he was born, on an island in the Mediterranean.
To be fair, I've been exiled from where I'm from.
Yeah.
They don't want to see me. They don't want to hear from me. I'll pop home once every 2 years, and they're like, right, fine, you're Shamey Brennan's son. He's not the worst. We'll overlook your foibles.
You're allowed in for 2 pints. So that was in April. By June, Ross had just about recovered from his wound when the order came down and he was told to pack his bags for the United States of America.
Because this is my United States of America.
So I think his wife's not too happy about this. I mean, he's just been shot. He has 4 kids. I know what you're saying. They're all like 4 years old at this stage. They can basically fend for themselves. But she still needs...
The rearing's done on them now, Kev. If they can't fend for themselves
Yes.
by 4. The Romans used to make you do it on the first night.
Sure, but she'd like them to see their father once more before he dies. So he promises that this will be his last military outing.
Oh, hold on. We're going full Lethal Weapon.
We've
got a Danny Glover on board.
Yeah.
He's getting too old for this shite.
Hey, that's the name of this show. Tell your friends. So, here's another tangent. In 1775, Jason, the American Revolution started and ran until 1783 when they got independence from the British. 20 years after that is when the Napoleonic Wars start, and the British create a blockade around France to stop trade coming in from any neutral countries, including America, which the Americans rightly point out was against international law.
It's weird that in my mind, when you say the word neutral country, I can only...
America's not on that list.
Yeah, I'm definitely not. And the only things I can think of are Ireland and Switzerland.
Yes. So, at the time, the British had a trading law saying that all American trade ships needed to dock in Britain and then pay tax on the goods before going on to the rest of Europe, which is... I don't know how they got away with that, considering, like, America was just another country. But basically, any country that was trading with Europe had to stop in England first, pay them some coin, and then they could go about their business.
Well, I mean, if you forget about Ireland, it is the first port of call.
Unless you're going straight to Portugal or Spain or into the Mediterranean.
No, not really. I mean, you're talking about, like, you head down to, I don't know, Bandon or anywhere, somewhere down in Cork, or you go over to the west coast, like a Valentia Island. You go over there, have a couple of pints with Jack Sparrow and the boys. I imagine this is still pirate times, right?
It is the pirate times.
Like, this is still the time of fictional pirates.
Yes.
Yeah.
But The next bit's about porridge. So the Americans were annoyed about this tax the British were making them pay. The Americans were also accused the British of constantly boarding American ships and then basically stealing their crew and making them join the British Navy. The British defense to this was the fact that a lot of their officers had fled because, you know, they'd been at war for 20 years, and some of their Navy officers were like, you know what, fuck it, I'm just going to go to America and live a normal life. And at the time, America had citizenship papers apparently, but they were very easily forged, so they weren't widely recognized.
What do you mean back
the British
then?
Just decided.
They've let me into the country.
So say the likes of you were on an American sailing ship and then the British boarded the ship. There's no way for you to prove that you're not a British sailor. So they were like, well, he might be. So they took you and they made you serve in the Navy.
All right, son, I'm on the top of a ship. I'm on the, I believe we call it a vessel.
That man's not from Chicago. Put him in our ship. But, it's very difficult to prove that you're not. It was very difficult to prove that you're an American citizen. And apparently the main way of doing
I'd
it
whip
was
down my jocks and they'd see the hood that I have on the top of my my little Johnson.
Well, actually, one of the main ways for sailors was to show American-style tattoos. So they'd show off their, like, eagle tattoo or their stars and stripes, and then that is somehow proof that they're not British.
Ah, but that's a very easy thing to do if you don't care about your country or nationality.
Yeah, they were like, okay, it's easy to forge these documents, but what's not easy is getting a bald eagle tattooed in your forehead. And even if he's not British and he's done that, you know what? He deserves it.
Well, I am thinking about a neck tattoo.
Oh yeah? Do you want to get the stars and stripes?
Well, no, I want to get the Irish flag. I want to get the...
That'll be great. You'll never have to worry about not working on a ship ever again.
I can from now on only work for Celtic Football Club, and if the IRA ever get back to being an LLC, and then I'm set for life.
Yeah, you can be their relationship manager.
I don't think that anyone's ever going to hire me as a relationship manager. I wouldn't hire me in my own relationship as a relationship manager. That's why I consistently ask you for advice.
You can be their HR person. So they're annoyed about the trade. They're annoyed about the British stealing their citizens off boats to make them join the Navy. It was also alleged that the British were secretly supporting the Native American Shawnee leader Tecumseh and providing weapons to the indigenous American population in order to stop the Americans expanding west, which, I mean, they probably were doing that.
Yeah.
So many Americans, including President James Madison, thought that with the British distracted by the Napoleonic Wars, they could conceivably take over Canada in the north and either use it as a bargaining chip or, just keep the place.
So the Americans had the same idea as us. Britain's troubles are our chance.
America had just recently massively increased its size after buying land from Napoleon in the Louisiana Purchase. So they were doing well out of the war so far. It didn't really matter that the land that Napoleon had sold them was predominantly inhabited by indigenous folk already. They owned it, and that's all that mattered. So on the 18th of June in 1812, President Madison asked Congress to approve the first ever declaration of war, and so began a proud American tradition alongside the War of 1812.
Fighting aliens on Independence Day.
It was the War of Independence Part 2. The declaration of war wasn't unanimous. A lot of the East Coast colonies who relied on trade rightly pointed out that even if the war was slowing down trade, if they declared war on the Brits, then that would just stop trade altogether. Whereas all the West Coast agrarian colonies, they wanted to take over more land.
Firstly, you say that like everyone knows what agrarian means. The farm colonies.
They wanted more territory for land farming and slave owning. So they thought, let's just take over Canada. It's just sitting there. Nobody's using it. So it also turns out that the British Foreign Secretary, Lord Castlereagh, had announced a relaxation on the British ship embargo like 6 days before the war was declared. But because it took like 3 weeks for the news to reach America, they'd already started the war. And it's just embarrassing if you have to turn back at that stage.
Like, how do imagine that happening now.
Yeah.
Just so you know, we're sending people over, and by the time you get this, they're there. It's like if I text you saying, hey, my friends are coming up to crash on your couch in Inchicore. They'll be there right now. Like, I'm giving it to you, like, I'm literally giving you 2 minutes notice. I'm sending this letter 3 weeks in advance. Hopefully, it'll get there in time.
Yeah. So, the War of 1812 broke out regardless. I mean, the letter had gotten there too late. It was too late for them to stop. There was no real reason for the Americans to go to war. They didn't really particularly want to go to war. It barely scraped by the vote in the Senate. And it just sort of happened. And there's no real reason for it.
Are you just describing Brexit?
Kind of. They were essentially like, let's just see. Let's just see what happens. Maybe when we're in the moment, we'll figure out what this war was about.
I didn't really think it was going to happen. I just wanted to see some change. I got all wrapped up.
Just kick it off. Independence Part 2. That was sort of fun. That was like 20 years ago. Let's do it again. Everyone in Europe's at war. Let's take Canada. I don't know what we'll do with it. We'll just have it. But at the time of the declaration of war, America had 17 ships in its fleet, compared to the British fleet of 1,000 ships. Their standing army was between 10 and 12,000 people.
How many do you have in wheelchairs?
Well, a lot of their officers were old and in wheelchairs, but they were still hanging around because of their conduct in the War of Independence, which was 30 years ago, rather than their ability to run or sit or be on a horse or anything like that. America's only advantage over the British was that the British were distracted by the Napoleon Wars, but after he was defeated in 1814, Robbie Ross was coming over to deal some British justice. I'd read at some point in the newspapers at the time the British referred to rebellious America as Jonathan. So they'd say things like, we're going to give Jonathan an out-rousing, which is vaguely sexual, but
wait, when you said
give Jonathan a good seeing to.
I was gonna say they would definitely just say seeing to if they were British. A good once over.
Yes, which is more sexual, really. So Robert Ross arrives in the Americas as a major general. He takes charge of all the British troops that are on the East Coast. It was here that he met up with his old buddy, Rear Admiral George Cockburn. The two boys are back together.
Hold on.
Yes,
because I had to stop myself from making jokes here, like about what you would just Rear Cockburn.
You got promoted to Rear Admiral.
Rear Cockburn.
Yeah.
Come on.
What? He's Rear Admiral Cockburn.
Don't make me make the joke. There are listeners at home.
There's no joke to be made.
Okay, right. You're being facetious. I'm going to leave it up to the listening public to make their own jokes about it. But here's if you haven't put it together yourself, here's a couple of ways that I would make it. Cock.
Yes.
Burn.
Rear,
as in bottom.
Yes.
Go forth at will.
I'm not seeing anything funny here. So, Rear Admiral Cockburn was swabbing the poop deck. So Cockburn had been in America since the start of the 1800s.
So Cockburn had been inside of America since the start of the 1800s?
Yes, he'd been there since the start of the 1812 war. And he had a score to settle because his brother had been killed during the American Revolution. So this time, it's personal.
Yeah, he wasn't willing to pull out.
That was that was one of his main features. So Ross led his troops along with Cockburn through Maryland, and they attacked the Americans at the Battle of Bladensburg on the 23rd of August, 1814. President James Madison was present at the battle. He was leading the American troops. The American historian Daniel Walker Howe has described Bladensburg as the greatest disgrace ever dealt to American arms, which is pretty harsh.
That is, especially considering some of the tattoos I've seen over here.
Fair point. So after winning that battle, Ross moves his army on to Washington, D.C., which I only found out recently is near Baltimore. I always thought it was in like the middle of America, but it's not at all.
No, it's like you've got that whole section that's like Philadelphia, Baltimore, D.C. You can, like, D.C. might be the furthest away from New York. It's 4 hours on a train.
Yeah.
So in the space of like anywhere is closer and easier of access to New York than like Carlow is to Dublin.
Yeah, you'd be lucky to get to Dublin from Carlow 4 hours on a train.
Or
Where would you find the train?
Or maybe, well, in fairness, Dublin might be a little easier. It's just as difficult and it takes just as long and probably more expensive to get from Carlow to Cork than it does Washington to New York. Or Baltimore to New York, Philadelphia to New York. Getting from Carlow to Cork, incredibly, vastly more difficult.
Yeah. But, so Ross brings the boys, fresh off the Battle of Bladensburg, brings them into Washington, D.C. According to one witness, a woman called Mary Clemmer, Ross entered the city under the white flag of truce, but then was fired upon from a house on Capitol Hill and had his horse shot out from underneath him. According to Clemner's account, the rumour of the day was that it was a club-footed garden barber Irishman who fired the shot.
How could you tell he had clubbed feet?
I have no idea. And like she just said it was the rumour of the time. I don't know what a garden barber is either.
I'm going to assume he was gay.
Maybe.
Just that's because I've heard the term before, an uphill gardener. I never knew what it meant. Everyone told me that it meant a gay guy. I'm like, but what does so a downhill gardener is like, that's a gardener who's clearly straight. Like, I don't...
An uphill gardener?
I don't know. Carlow people.
Well, I don't know. I looked up what a gardener barber is.
I thought you were going to say, so I looked up what a gardener was, and it's Johnson who I employ to cut my hedges at the bottom. Turns out, what I have in front of my 17-acre landmass in Dundalk, that's what you'd all know as a garden.
Interesting. I always just knew it as the estate, and I always thought Johnson was just some sort of leaf slave. But it turns out they're called gardeners.
I would reference it as the big green.
Well, apart from being difficult to say, I don't know what a gardener barber is. And there's no, like, the fact that this is suddenly an Irishman, I feel, is a little racist. There's no evidence to support that it was an Irishman who was sniping bullets at the man carrying the peace flag. But, well, since Ross was flying a white flag, this was considered something of a dick move in warfare, and it meant that all bets were off. So, in retaliation, Ross ordered the burning of all the public buildings of Washington, D.C., including the Navy Yard, the White House, or the President's Mansion as it was known at the time, and the Capitol Building.
Or it was known at the time, why would it be called anything other than the White House house?
Yeah, I don't know if it was white at the time, it was just a house. Ross's second in command, Admiral Cockburn, I don't know if he was second in command, but I'm going to say he was.
Admiral Second Degree Cockburn.
He wanted to burn down the whole city. But Ross was steadfast that only public buildings would be destroyed and the private property would be left untouched. Apparently the only private house that was torched on purpose was the one where the shots had been fired from initially. They ran up there and tried to burn it down. Which it's a fine idea, but also who's going to pay for the public buildings once they've been burnt down? It's grand that you don't burn down small businesses and people's houses, but they're still going to have to pay for the rebuilding of the White House afterwards. It's not as if James Madison's going to do that himself.
Fair, but also don't think about the aftermath of vigilante justice.
The story is told as Ross holding back his army, and apparently even the people at the time who were writing about it, they were like, well, he was shot at with a white flag, which means he can literally do anything he wants. And the fact that he showed some amount of restraint by not burning down everything and killing everyone in sight somehow stands to him as being a decent man.
I mean, yes.
I suppose so.
It's a different time.
Things are...
I mean, if we're going to...
Some things are different, Jason.
If people are going to commit mass genocides and just attacks on different religious beliefs or people from different countries in the past, we're talking hundreds and thousands of years ago, and we go, hey, well, it's a different time, so we probably shouldn't hold them to the same. Give them some leeway as well. It's not, they didn't know any better. They thought that you spoke with a Dundalk accent, you should be put and banished outside of the pale.
Put to death.
Yes, I mean, and Kevin, were they wrong?
No, I suppose not.
Your words, not mine.
Well, you're talking about the differences that happen between generations of time, how we can't hold people to the same standard we hold ourselves to today. Things change. Some things don't change. Apparently, Admiral Cockburn ordered the destruction of the printing shop in Washington, and he was quoted as saying, "Be sure that all the C's are destroyed, so that the rascals can no longer abuse my name." So apparently at the time, people were ragging on Cockburn just as much as we have been in the last hour. Which is really endearing to hear.
But what? So he thought his name would just then be Ockburn.
Ockburn, yeah, which is much better.
Yeah.
Washington City burnt down by Ockburn. He's some unt. Stop. And then so they progressed on to the Capitol building, where apparently Admiral Cockburn stood at the speaker's chair and said, "Shall this harbour of Yankee democracy be burned? All for it, say aye." And everyone said aye, and they burnt the place to the ground.
All against? Go fuck yourself.
So up until, 2 weeks ago, this was the last attack that had happened on the Capitol building of the United States of America.
Well, we don't know when this is going to come out. But in the past couple of weeks, we've had the, what do you call it? The assault on Precinct 13. I don't know, like the attack on the Capitol of America, in the Washington,
Yes.
D.C., which was interesting.
It was, I've never seen, just by the look of their faces walking around, you wouldn't have thought that these are people who are thought that there would be multiple years prison as consequence for what they're at.
Which I hope there is, because then we'll have it'll be my favorite ever before and after photo.
But this is something I hadn't seen referenced since it happened, but the last time the Capitol building was stormed was done by a man from outside Newry.
Mm.
I haven't seen a reference that it was a man from County Down that did the burning. It's always just the British.
Well,
I just think, credit where credit's due. It was one of our own that burnt the place
he
down.
wasn't part of the gentry. He was a normal man. You might call him a Roscommon.
He was a common Ross. But also, Ross Trevor is right across from Carlingford, where Joe Biden's ancestors are from. So I'm not going to say that it was an inside job from Sleepy Joe, but
You're saying that.
I'll happily let you connect the dots yourself.
Okay, well, if you that's the dangerous thing for this podcast, because if you let me connect those dots, I go, well, Hunter Biden. Then it was all Hunter Biden.
You're looking in the wrong place with Ukraine. You should have been looking at the deals done across the Mourne Mountains. So apparently their plan when they went into Washington was to ransom the buildings back to the American government, but they scrapped that plan once they were shot at. I mean, you can't kill a man's horse. That's just not on. According to one of the eyewitnesses, it was Ross himself that was stacking up the furniture to burn down the White House. So this is a mad situation where a British force has just landed at America, walked right to the capital. I think they've been at war for 2 years, but most of the war was focused up on the Canadian front, and they've basically walked into the capital with zero resistance. One guy shot at him, who might have been a club-footed Irish gardener barber, and then burnt down the governmental system of Washington. One of Ross's officers said, "We could scarcely believe the Americans, from their immense population and well-trained artillery, would tamely allow a handful of British soldiers to advance through the heart of their country and burn and destroy the capital of the United States." Which, in fairness, is pretty mad that they just let that happen.
Yeah.
Twice. So after the successful sacking of Washington, Ross is feeling like he's on a hot streak. Either he was pressured into it by the top brass back in England, or he decided on his own to continue on and attack Baltimore. When they're getting ready to attack, a Georgetown lawyer by the name of Francis Scott Keyes showed up to negotiate the release of an American prisoner called Dr. Beans. Now, I couldn't figure out why Dr. Beans was arrested, but
I can't figure out why it's so funny.
I assume he lived his life and everyone made fun of him for being Mr. Beans. And then he went to go get a doctorate to prove them all wrong, to prove that he wasn't just some stooge called Mr. Beans. And the fact that he got a doctorate only made it funnier, because now he's Dr. Beans.
Was his first name Heinz?
Maybe this is the origin. Maybe this is the guy who invented Heinz beans. I don't know. Maybe that's why they wanted him back. He had the secret to that Heinz bean sauce.
Yeah, it's sugar and tomato juice.
In classic, gentry style, he just walked up and dined with General Ross and some of the other British officers on board the HMS Tonnet. And Ross agreed to release Dr. Beans because he was impressed by how British prisoners who'd been wounded at the Battle of Bladensburg were treated by the Americans. But because Ross and the lads were just about to attack Baltimore, they wouldn't let Key back on shore until after the attack, so he had to stay on board the Tonnant for the battle. And from on board the ship, he saw what he described as a massive bombardment unleashed by the Royal Navy on Fort McHenry, and the sight of the Stars and Stripes still flying from the ramparts of Fort McHenry when the bombardment was finished inspired him to write a little song known as the Star-Spangled Banner.
I think what you mean is that the stars and stripes burn big and bright deep in the heart of Texas. That's the there's not many Texas songs I hear. That's all I have for it.
Well, as another small world moment, Fort McHenry was named after Dr. James McHenry, who was from Ballymena in County Antrim. So only down the road from Ross himself.
Ballymena, Mayo?
No, I think that's a different Ballymena. This is the one. I think it's as a rule of thumb, anything that was named after an Irishman in the 17th or 1800s, any streets or cities or forts named after Irishmen were named after Scots Irishmen, because I think it was a while before the boys from the south were allowed indoors in America.
It was a while before we had shoes, so it was tough to trace our footprints.
Yes. But on the morning of the 12th of September 1814, Ross landed with his troops south of Baltimore and advanced towards the city when his troops were attacked by American militia groups. As Ross led his troops from the front, he was shot by two sharpshooters, allegedly Daniel Wells, aged 18, and Henry McCummins, aged 19. He died while he was being carried back to the fleet. In another small world twist, the place where Ross was killed is now known as the city of Dundalk in Maryland.
What?
Yeah, I didn't bother checking. I read that in one thing. I know there is a Dundalk outside Maryland, or outside Baltimore, which I learned from The Wire, but I didn't bother to check if that was accurate. I'm going to believe that it is. I'm assuming Dundalk is south of Baltimore.
It's such a ridiculous fact that I'm not even going to make a kissing your own sister joke. Do they do that there too? No, I don't care.
Probably, yes. I think they pronounce it like Induk. I don't know. We need someone from Baltimore to send a voice message to us and let us know.
I'm in America now, so if you want, I can probably, as is such a small nation with Ireland, it's pretty much the same over here. If you want me to get on to Omar or Stringer or Avon, I can ask.
Yeah. Oh yeah, just you probably know them over there. Yeah, just
to be honest, I'd be closer to Mario Stanfield than I would any of the other boys. Snoop a little bit. People often think, Jason, you'd be good friends with Jimmy McNulty. I'm like, no, because here's the thing. I grew up in a different time period of Ireland. I don't believe that Bushmills is a Protestant whiskey. I think that it's just a whiskey, and I think that people from the north are just as Irish as anybody else. Fuck you, Dominic West.
I think they're humans too.
Yeah, this is...
Yeah, well, Dominic's from London.
I know, and the absolute... The West Brit mentality of him, Kev. That the fact that he doesn't understand that we can all have our differences but still get along.
There's some great scenes in The Wire where Dominic West's accent slips entirely and he just goes straight back to being like a British man.
Oh, when I'm pretty sure when he does the line about the, hey, can I get a Jameson? We don't stock Jameson. We got some Bushmills. He's like, ain't that a Protestant whiskey? That he just slips back into pure British.
That's one of them there Protestant whiskies. I won't be having that. I'll be having me a straight Jameson, please.
Well, he's not from Bristol.
The Americans managed to defeat the British at the Battle of Baltimore and brought them a step closer to ending the War of 1812, which, in retrospect, was an optimistic name for a war that went on for quite a few years. But I know that at least one of them, and think possibly two of the men that killed Ross, were killed in the Battle of Baltimore. But apparently there's various streets in Baltimore named after Wells and McCummins, who brought down the great Robert Ross. Ross's body was preserved in a barrel of 129 gallons of Jamaican rum aboard the HMS.
Way too much. That's like 600 litres.
Yeah. I would imagine that's all the rum, and they used it to keep this guy's body in.
That's like all the rum in China.
I know health and safety probably wasn't the same back then as it is now, but all the same, You wouldn't want to be drinking that after Rob Ross has been sitting in there for a week. So he was kept in the rum barrel aboard the ship for a couple of days until the barrel was sent to Halifax in Canada, where he was buried on the 29th of September 1814 in the Old Burying Ground, which sounds like a made-up name for a graveyard, but apparently it's like a big deal to be buried.
Well, I was going to say, is that a name given to it years later?
No, apparently at the time it was referred to as the Old Burying Ground.
They didn't expect us to see the next millennium. They were like, this is the old burying ground. John died here 4 years ago. If you think that we're getting to the next decade, I mean...
And so that was the end of Robert Ross. He died a Major General, which was a pretty high rank. He wasn't awarded a knighthood, but his family were granted the victory title of Ross of Bladensburg, which is, I guess, a pretty cool name. So that's...
But that's weird, because I
didn't
didn't think that, as far as to my recollection, Bob Ross actually died on Independence Day in 1995.
Is Bob Ross dead?
Yeah, man.
Shit. That's good that he died on Independence Day.
Yeah, the aliens, they took him up. Will Smith had to go up there after him. Do you not remember this? Bill Pullman was up there in the sky fighting aliens.
It rings a bell.
And then...
Are you thinking of Independence Day 2?
No, I still haven't seen that. I'm not watching that. But Dennis Quaid, I miss him. I hope he's still out there in his RV running around the world, America, probably just looking for aliens. I hope he's good.
I hope so. All right, let's rattle through the last few things here. It would have made a cool movie, but there's some evidence that there was a plan to send an American SWAT team over to Ross Trevor to burn down his hometown as a revenge for burning down Washington.
We're the SWAT boys. We SWAT.
There's at the minute, well, it was built in 1826, but there's a 99-foot granite obelisk dedicated to Robert Ross in his hometown of Ross Trevor. It fell into disrepair during the Troubles because no one wanted to maintain it because he was a big British military officer. But back in 2008, at the expense of £250,000, the Mourne County Council revamped it. So it's this giant, it's like 100-foot tall obelisk on the side of Carlingford Lough. You can't miss it if you're driving around the place. And I imagine there's got to be at least a couple of Americans who pulled over to see, oh, what? Look at you here. What's this? Who's this Clinton monument to? And then they read the signs about this giant monument dedicated to the man that burnt down the capital city.
Oh, never mind. This obelisk isn't a representation of a penis inside of a young intern's mouth. That's not important to the American history.
It's not important to American culture. It's about a man who burnt down the building. So the War of 1812 ended on Christmas Eve 1814 with the Treaty of Ghent, but because of the distance of the Atlantic Sea, the news didn't get to anyone for about 3 weeks, at which stage one more big battle had happened and thousands of people died for zero reason at all. And there's no clear point for the war. So when the negotiations began, the British suggested taking back some of the American land and then setting up like a pretty sizable demilitarized zone for the Native American population. Like, this would have been a huge state that they would have set up for the indigenous people to live in. But that was all dropped because at the same time back in Europe, they were trying to convince the Russian and Prussian empires not to carve up Europe after the Napoleon Wars. And they figured it'd look pretty bad if they were like taking chunks out of America while telling the Russians not to do it in Europe. So they just said, fuck it. And there was literally zero outcomes from the war. The war went on for 2 years. Washington got burnt down. All these people died. No land changed hands. Nothing happened. No one really knew why they fought the war. And it was just over.
I mean, it's my favorite type of war.
Yeah?
That just means it's one of the few times in history where the people who started the war and then eventually ended the war were honest about the reasoning for the war. Nothing. Superfluous nonsense.
Like, I don't know why this happened.
It was pointless. Yeah.
Everyone was doing it and I just thought it'd be fun. And it was, in fairness. So, Kilkenny man James Hoban, the 1780 winner of the prestigious Duke of Leinster's medals for drawing of brackets, stairs and roofs, as I'm sure you know him best.
Yes, I would have called him the King of Leinster, but fair enough, continue.
Yeah, he'd won a competition in 1792 to design the original White House, and was brought back again to redesign the building of the new White House after it was burnt down, which is a great bit of business.
It is. Also, that's someone that I looked into for a previous episode. I was like, I'm going to do a full...
There's not much on him.
There's fucking nothing on him. So that's why I stopped doing that. I'm glad that
Yeah.
you've referenced him now in a different episode.
Yes.
Because so boring. The fact that an Irish guy built and designed the White House, and you're like, well, there's got to be, if he has one other interesting
Yeah.
thing in his life, we're doing a full episode about it. Zero. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing.
The only other thing about him was he's built
the
a couple
only
of buildings
interesting-
in Ireland.
The only interesting thing about him is that he was a giant racist.
Yes, he owned quite a few slaves.
Yeah. And he was actually very adamant on the naming of the house.
Yeah, they were like, we should call it the presidential house,
No.
and he said, no.
Yeah.
My building, my rules.
We need to set some precedents. No, it's always going to be full of precedents. I'm talking about a different thing.
It's weird that they brought him back to build the White House again after like another man.
I mean, he's built it before.
Yeah, listen, it doesn't matter that his countryman burnt it down. Get him in.
Yeah, I mean, he knows the layout. It's like when if there's a former military group that are talking about a terrorist act and threatening a terrorist act on the city of San Francisco with nuclear bombs, you don't go and get someone who's going to be a special secret agent's operative. You get a 67-year-old Sean Connery who's been 25 years locked up in jail.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's what you do. It makes sense.
You get someone who's been there before. The only other connection I wanted to finish up on was while Ross was in America, Napoleon escaped from exile, escaped from the island of Elba, which is like 10 kilometers away from Italy, which means you could swim it on a good day.
I have seen you take a break while we've gone for a walk, and you're going to tell me that
we've never gone for a walk.
We have gone on many a jaunt.
So eventually Napoleon escaped, made it back to mainland France, and started off the Napoleonic Wars again for round 7, I think it was at this stage. But this time it only lasted for 111 days and eventually finished in the Battle of Waterloo in Britain, where he was defeated for real this time.
Because he couldn't escape even if he wanted to.
Exactly. So there's a series of newspaper headlines that appeared in a Parisian newspaper in between Napoleon's escape and his arrival in Paris. It starts off on March the 9th. The first headline is, "The Anthropophagus has quitted his den." The next day, "The Corsican ogre has landed at Cape Juan." The following day, "The tiger has arrived at Cap." "The monster slept at Grenoble." "The tyrant has passed through Lyon." "The usurper is directing his steps towards Dijon." "Bonaparte is only 60 leagues from the capital." "Bonaparte is advancing with rapid steps, but he will never enter Paris." "Napoleon will tomorrow be under our ramparts." "The Emperor is at Fontainebleau." "His Imperial Royal Majesty arrived yesterday evening at Tuileries amidst the joyful acclamation of his devoted and faithful subjects."
It sounds like he likes a procession.
Well, the first day he shows up, they're like, "This piece of shit, flesh-eating scumbag is back. We hate him." And then within 10 days, they're like, His Majesty has returned. All hail Napoleon. I always loved you, man. You've always been number one.
He is getting ever closer, so it makes sense.
He is getting ever closer. That does make
you're
sense. He's a scary man.
What a bollocks. This guy, oh wait, he's 90 kilometers away? Well, he's not as bad as what I was saying directly before. He's 50 kilometers away? Well, actually, he's got some good ideas. If you take, here's the problem. Don't be around him with a group of people. Get him on his own. He's not a bad guy.
Yes,
He's not a bad dude.
So Napoleon does that. He returns to France. 111 days later, he's defeated for real this time. So after the War of 1812 was over, Ross's old friend and our favourite soldier in the story, Rear Admiral George Cockburn, was charged with bringing Napoleon to St. Helena.
You were
South
saying
Atlantic.
that just to make me laugh. You're saying that just
Oh
to,
yeah, that's the only reason. The only reason this guy is in this story.
You are tickling my balls with the concept of the name Cockburn.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, dog, because this is a really interesting thing that he's done. Like, so he for whatever reason, he's entrusted as being the one to bring. So the second time they exile Napoleon, they do it for real this time, and they send him out to some island in the middle of the South Atlantic. And Cockburn is the one who's entrusted with bringing him out there. So while he's doing this, he writes a diary. I think it takes like 67 to 70 days or something to bring him out. And Cockburn writes a diary of his time where it's just him as the rear admiral on this ship, and then Napoleon and his French lackeys. And it's a really interesting dive into like Napoleon coming to terms with the fact that he's not an emperor anymore, and that he's lost the wars, and that he's going to live out the rest of his days in some shithole island in the middle of nowhere.
I mean, not a bad like.
Yeah, it is. It's not bad, but it's still for him. I guess a man, he's lost it all.
Yeah, but like
he's not been
but
executed.
Adolf ended up with cyanide in a bunker. This guy gets to
Yes.
he gets to go to he gets to Lord of the Rings it. He's just going to an island to live out his days. That's not so bad. He's a little man on an island.
But it's an interesting book in that like Cockburn is his sworn enemy, but also can't help but like the man from a military standpoint. And he's just got 70 days in which to nerd out and be like, what was going on here? What were you at? Why did you take over this thing? So he arrives at St. Helena. Cockburn remains the governor there for about a year, I think. And then he leaves Napoleon to live out the rest of his days until he dies on St. Helena in 1821. So that's it. That's a slightly relevant story about our man from Newry who burnt down Washington in 1814.
Fair. Should we put this out this week and hashtag Donny?
We can't hashtag him anymore because he's been banned from all the social media sites. I don't know, inciting riots.
He
apparently.
was just doing a job as an actual journalist.
Oh, Donny.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I thought you meant the other Donny.
No, God, not the fucking...
I thought you meant the big Don, not Donny from Kerry.
Yes, the big Don. Donny O'Sullivan.
Let's tag Donny O'Sullivan, tag Joe Biden. This is his countrymen. And hashtag the capital.
I don't think weed's legal in DC yet, just yet.
Well, that's it. I'll chat to you next week. Good luck.
Shafter.
See ya.